Oh man, the dreaded for loop. But I'm going to make you understand the for loop. I really think I'll help you understand this. Man, I remember when I was first learning to coding, the for loop was just so evasive and so elusive. I don't really understand what this is doing, and I would like write it and type it all out because I'm following some, tutorial or something, and I write it all out, but I don't really understand what it's doing. You're going to understand what it's doing. I guarantee it. Because what I found out once I understood, I'm like, oh, why didn't they just explain it like this? And that's how I'm going to explain it to you in a way that will actually make sense. And I guarantee it that you will understand what for loops are for at least much more than you do now. But you should understand them to a great depth so that when we do get into the collision part and I explain it again, you'll understand what it's doing in the collision. So the first thing then is I'm gonna make a thing up here. I'm just gonna set this to like, I don't know, vivid light or something like that. This is just so I can show you as we go through this what I'm talking about. So this is an example of a for loop. And what this is, let's say we have this in our create event. Doesn't matter whether say it's in our player object and it's in the create event, right? Meaning it's just gonna run one time. But because it's a for loop, it's not gonna just run one time. It's actually gonna run, in this case, two times. I'll explain that. So a for loop is very much like an if statement. Remember I told you, I explained the visualization of if statement, that you have the if statement, that is, if this is true, this is like your key. So if I is less than 2, then this door will open, we'll go inside, and we'll execute the code inside of it. And then that's that. Hey, whoa, I know, sorry for the interruption, just real quick interruption. I don't have sponsors, so like I'm basically my own sponsor. I just want to interrupt really quickly the lesson and let you know that you can get the course now right here, the full course. Also, there's some other free lessons here. If you just click the course, it's only $12.99 right now for a limited time. Normally it's like $100. So go check out the course, watch some of the other free lessons, see if you like how the teaching style flows. I really start from like the beginning of all beginnings and really help you understand code, which is super important. I don't just go, hey, here's how you make a guy walk. I explain what the code is doing, how and why it's doing it, so that way you understand how you can use that code and apply it to other things other than the context we're learning it for, like walking or something. So definitely check that out. And I just want to say thank you everyone for subscribing. I totally appreciate it, but I just want to let you know the channel is going to be taking a different turn. I'm going to be bringing back some of my writing lessons. So for those of you that were like, hey man, where have you been with writing lessons? I'll bring some of those back. I'm going to be showing you some of my new workflow because I've been getting heavy back into writing again, working on this new novel and everything. And so I'm going to show you that new workflow and how AI can help you write faster, but you're still doing the writing. And it just makes it so much more fun. You don't have to like do editing anymore, which is fantastic. And so stay tuned for that. And also let me know in the comments, like, what do you want to see next? And by the way, no hard feelings at all, guys. If you don't like the direction the channel is going to be taking, hey, I'm cool with that. You can unsubscribe. It actually helps the algorithm if you're not interested anyway. So no hard feelings. I appreciate you being here. And for those that want to stick around, I'll be doing more AI type stuff for different things. And actually, I'm going to be showing you a free lesson how to kind of use AI to help learn coding even faster after you started like taking one of the beginning courses. And I'll also be doing a C# course with Unity soon, so stay tuned for that. And yeah, let me know what kind of free lessons would you like to see here on YouTube? What kind of videos would you like to see me cover here on YouTube? And yeah, so it'll be a lot of different AI stuff as related to art, and then some game stuff and coding and some writing stuff. So yeah, that's kind of the thing I want to do now. So if you don't like it, I understand. And back to the lesson. Sorry about that. Well, a for loop is where you can do that multiple times. So it's like an if statement, but executed multiple times, or possibly multiple times, depending how you set it up, because this might be unknown. So this is the execution that it runs in. So the for loop, very much again like an if statement, starts with this though. It starts with let me put this to a bright color. It starts with the variable initialization. So you want to initialize the variable. I'm going to make this even darker and maybe right about here. A little bit more. There we go. So it first does this. Well, actually, it does all of this. That's the first part. There's 3 sections. There's this section, and this section. And they carry out in that exact order. So you have you first have this right here. It checks to see, well, it doesn't check anything. It just, this is a variable, a local variable. So var, typically I is used. You can use other letters and J and so on. But typically I is used for a for loop. And that way everyone recognizes what it is and you recognize what it is. But first it checks this, or just, it reads this line of code. And so it just sets I to 0. So now I is the same as 0, right? So we learned about variables. We put 0 inside of the box called I. And so now whenever we write I is 0. So I is 0 here, I is 0 here, so on. I equals 0 now. That's the first thing it does. Then it doesn't do that anymore. It only does that one time. Then it's going to execute this piece of code. And it's going to go, well, 0, because remember I equals 0. 0 is less than 2. And since 0 is less than 2, then it's going to open the door, right? So then it's going to execute this piece of code right here. In this case, this code here is going to create a mine, an object mine, at random room width and random room height. So basically somewhere within the room, and it could be anywhere within the room, it's going to create a mine. It's going to create it one time. So boom, there's a random mine created. That's what happened so far. Then it's going to read this right here. And what this is, you don't have to do I++. You can do I equals I plus 1 or I equals I plus 2 if you wanted to add 2 to it every time. But this is the I++ is the same as I equals I plus 1. So it's basically adding 1, or I plus equals 1. Those all mean the same thing. So it's adding 1 to 0. So now 0 plus 1 is 1. So after it reads this line of code, then it jumps to here and it reads that line of code. And so now I no longer equals 0. I now equals 1. Then it pops out of the room. It pops out of this code because it read this, and then it starts back over. It now checks the condition again. 1 is still less than 2, so it executes this code again, then it jumps out and it adds 1 to it. So now we have 2. I equals 2. So it ran this code 2 times. It checks this again. Well, 2 is not less than 2, it's equal to 2, so it doesn't open the door, it doesn't read this code. Right? That's how it works. Now think about it like this. This is the room. This is the door. And I didn't feel like making another animation. I already deleted the other room, unfortunately, so we're just going to do it like this as a visualization. So here's the key we need. In order to open this door, we need this key right here. It needs to be true. So right now, I equals 0, so 0 is less than 2. Hey, that means it's true. That means we have the key. This door opens. Let's say, boom, it opens and looks like that. Now we enter inside. We execute all the code in the room. Right, that's basically how the for loop is working. So it executes this code here, which creates a random mine in the room somewhere, and then it adds 1 to our 0, so our I. So now our I equals 1. It jumps out of the room, and then the door closes. So now we can't get back in the room again, and it then checks this again. And upon checking it again, and this is true that even if this is in a create event, it's going to keep checking. The difference between an if statement and a for loop is the if statement only checks the condition one time, and then that's it, it's done. The for loop continues to check. It continues to run this and continues to check until this is false. So until the condition is false, it's going to keep on running the code. That's why it runs the code more than once, even though this is placed in the create event. Remember, the create event only runs code one time. But a loop, like a while loop, or in this case a for loop, will continue to run until the condition is now false. So it then checks it again, and 1 is still less than 2. So it opens the door, we enter the room, we execute this code. So it creates another mine. So now there's 2 mines that are created inside of the room. This is like similar to if you wanted to create some random mines like in Smash TV, for example. And then it's going to add 1 to our I. So now our I equals 2. We pop out of the room, the door closes, and it runs this condition again, and it goes, oh, it's false. We no longer have a key to open the door, so it's not going to iterate I, and it's going to jump out of the for loop altogether. It's no longer going to execute any of this code. That code is now done. Now the difference is if you place the same code inside of a step event, it's a little different. What the step event does is it runs all of the lines of code over and over and over again every frame. So on that frame, it checks. So what happens is on the frame, I don't think I need to explain it this way anymore. Well, I guess I can still explain it this way. On the frame, it checks this, right? Or it checks this, there we go. And it goes, okay, it's true because right now I equals 0, and it's true, it opens the door, runs the code, jumps out of the door, and then now, because it added this, now I equals 1. However, it's not allowed to exit this when you're in a step event. It gets stuck on the for loop. It can't continue down to the next lines of code. It has to keep reading this until it can no longer read it, until it's false. So it'll keep doing this until the condition is not met, and then it will continue onwards. So even though we're in the step event, it's going to go and read this again, because it's going to now say, well, 1 is less than 2. Door opens, we execute this code, and now I equals 2. Then it checks it again. 2 is less than 2. That's not true. It's false, so it doesn't open the door, and now it'll skip this code and move on to the next lines of code beneath it if there are any more lines of code to read. So basically, this means that what a for loop is going to do in this case inside of a step event is it's going to create 2 mines, 2 random mines in the room every frame. That means in 1 second, you're going to have 120 mines in the room, which is crazy, right? Because our game runs default at 60 frames a second. And since it's creating 2 mines per frame, then that's 60 times 2. So 120 mines per second. That's insane. That would blow the game up, right? So you'd want to put this inside. You can put this entire for loop inside of an if statement, for example. Or something like that is, you can have some other condition. So you can say you only want this to happen, on some event or something like that. In this case, you would really only want to do this like when you start the game. So in the create event, but there might be a case where you want to do something like this in the step event. I'm not really sure what that case would be. Maybe you want to create a couple mines when the player kills or destroys a certain kind of creature, right? Then you want 2 random mines placed in the room. So that way that creature is rather dangerous. Like, okay, I have to kill that creature, but I know if I kill that creature, it's going to spawn 2 random mines. And it's only going to do that while you've killed the creature, and it's only going to do, it's then going to run that for loop. That is, the condition is if the creature is dead, that instance of the creature is dead, it's then going to run the for loop, but it's going to continue to run the for loop. Once you enter into a for loop, whatever the condition is that makes you get into it, doesn't matter if that condition is no longer true. Like, it's no longer true that the enemy was killed. It's now dead and gone, right? But once it's entered this for loop, it's going to continue running it until it can't run it no more. And so it's basically, a for loop is a way to run a certain amount of, like, whatever code is inside the for loop, which is inside these brackets here. Whatever's inside those brackets, just like an if statement, is going to be the code that runs when the condition's met. This is the condition that needs to be met. And so it's basically a way to run a certain piece of code a certain amount of times. So I can make this if I is less than 5 or something like that, or maybe I want to do it until my health is 0, then I can say I is less than health, and so on. And so I can basically say I want to run this code a certain amount of times once I enter my for loop, right? So by putting a for loop nested inside of an if statement, that I'm saying if that if statement ever is true, so if I ever kill that particular kind of enemy, then this code will be ran this amount of times, right? I was about to say X amount of times, but in this case, I amount of times. So if I want to run this code, let's say I want to create 5, then I would say I is less than 5. And I would start I at 0, and then I is less than 5. That means anytime I enter into this for loop, that is, I kill that particular enemy type, it's going to create 5 random mines. Now, you probably wouldn't want to create 5 random mines, but this would be really cool. Let's say you want an enemy upon death to spawn a bunch of babies of himself or something, right? We've seen those kind of enemy types. This is how you can do that. So you would put this, you would nest this inside of an if statement that says if that particular enemy type is destroyed by the player, is killed, then we're going to run into this for loop. Let's say I want to create 3, so it's I less than 3, and the instance create death, but instead of object mine, you would instead create like object mini whatever that creature is, right? Whatever name it is, that object would have its own game logic, and then it would behave however it does. Maybe they're just a bunch of little worms that chase after the player or something like that really quickly, like faster than the person they just killed. And so that's kind of cool. So that's an easy way to kind of do that. So hopefully now you have a better understanding of the for loop. Let's go through it one more time. So now that you understand that it's like an if statement. So if you understand if statements, then you should be able to understand for loops. But unlike an if statement, it's going to continue run until the key is no longer true. And so you enter into the for loop, which is here. It's going to first set the variable. After the variable is set, it's then going to check the condition. In this case, we set I to 0, so 0 is less than 2 is true. And because it's true, it's going to execute the code. Boom, like that. So it jumps in between these two brackets here, executes the code. And after it executes the code, it always then jumps here and adds whatever increment you want. You can either subtract from it or add from it. And you don't have to just do one. You can do, I equals I or I plus equals 3. You can add 3 to it every single time, for example, if you wanted to. And then it's going to go back here and it's going to go back to the condition again just to check until it's false. So it checks the condition again. It's still true. So it jumps inside of here, executes the code, jumps out, does the increment, adds 1 to it. Now I equals 2. 2 less than 2 is now false. It then jumps out of this and then skips down and skips down here and starts reading the next lines of code. So let's think about it this way now. It reads the variable. Now I equals 0. It then checks the condition, right? So it checks the condition. It's true because 0 is less than 2, which then opens this door. So it reads the code. It reads this code inside the room. And then because I show you the visible, this is also inside the room. So it reads that, increments, or you can think about it jumping back out and increments, right? So this is the way to think about it. And I hope that this helps you because I didn't get this kind of explanation. When I was learning, I had to figure it out the hard way. And it took me a while to kind of figure it out. And so hopefully now you understand it. If you do, that's awesome. If not, just watch this over a couple times maybe. Think about it more. Also, maybe when we get into the collision, which is now, after this, we're going to start getting to the collision code. Once we start getting to the for loop, I explain it again and how it applies to different context. Maybe having more than one context will help you understand it differently or better. But you should be able to understand it now. But don't beat yourself up if you don't. For loops are kind of tricky, but this was a way better explanation than I ever got. So I'll see you in the next lesson.